The culture is what we are. The future is what we make. But the mission now is to facilitate collaboration and connection that leads to increased evidence-informed decision-making together. The oneness of our nation is a symbol of our collective individualism. With diverse people coming from near and far to put an end to poverty and inequality in Africa. Pass to me, they can know. Move your position. The connection of African nations is the development of its general population. Oh, yes. We need to. We need to gain experience and share amongst us, because we are not a different people living a separate life. On the contrary, we are interconnected in ways we cannot comprehend. Reason we need to come together, both scientifically and artistically, to experience the sweetness of evidence communality. Astral navigation will open our minds. Astral navigation will open our minds.
beyond our minds. We need to enhance skills of individuals and groups, improving the environment to get things done, opening gateways for the information to flow. Today is the tomorrow Africa will always be proud of, connected through the whispers of our forebears. In communion with Pan-Africa, we are in unison. We sing the same song, the song of humanity, the song of solidarity, the song of our African nation. And above all, we sing the song of practice. We sing the song of evidence. And we sing the song of
Dissemination! I've done now.
Oh, yes. There is need. There is need for the collaboration of all those engaged in evidence-informed decision-making ecosystems. My people, good people, there is need for Africa's full voice and participation in the regional, national, and global movement to increase evidence-informed decision-making.
There is need to go beyond our normal, non-scientific, and inexperienced approach to situation. Projecting the evidence, the science through art, tracing out the problems of nations through evidence dissemination. As we improve livelihood in the cause of all evidence communality.
We should not paint the black line anymore. This is the Africa we are moving now.
Yes, being wabi ina famia ambo beta bi ina zang mabu gurma meta bi ina jifa lalawu anenu evidence informed decision making. Tabuta chiambi Bina ke famia amba beta bina ananu networking mum Africa zangma bogrema meta beji fa anye en célébrer la New Africa. Tabuta chiambi Wabobu Africa bojima anu networking le Wabobu Africa bojima anu Africa le Bina song bobo mata boyin chambi Hana non tema bina le Wabobu Africa boji manu no evidence mum Africa le Wabobu Africa boji manu no evidence mum Africa lo Wabobu Africa boji manu nugrata nun chimchi sigana mum Africa le Wabobu Africa boji ma angrma dan nun chimchi sigana mum Africa le Wabobu Africa boji manu no evidence mum Africa lo Wabobu Africa boji manu no evidence mum Africa le Wabobu Africa boji manu no evidence, mum, Africa, le. Wabobu Africa, bonjimane no evidence, mum, Africa, lo.
Go outside.
Good afternoon to everybody. I don't know what you're feeling now, but I have a renewed sense of feeling that yes, we can. Yes, we can drive out poverty and inequality.
Okay. Let's all be standing for the national anthem of the Republic of Uganda. Thank you. You can all take your seats.
Thank you all. In between activities, we will want to observe a few housekeeping rules and available for this program are multiple modals that we are transmitting across. Yes, you are here in person. Let's clap for ourselves for being here. But also we have a great number of audience joining us remotely, and together we can connect through the mobile app deployed for this very event. So if you have not connected yet on your mobile app, please do that. It's available on the two major platforms, the Play Store and the App Store. You search for Events Hub, Events app on either of the platforms, and you can grab and register. Registration links have been personalized, so they've been sent to you if you've registered for this event. So kindly connect via the app and you can have access to all of the things, including the program itself, the safety briefing for our use here. You can connect with the online participants as well. And then for refreshments, we all go down to ground zero on the ground floor and have that. That's where refreshments will mostly be served, just by the reception. I'm sure many of us found that when coming in. And we ask that you kindly mute your devices because it might interfere with the different audiovisual setups here. So kindly mute your devices or silence them as well. Generally, there will be 3 sessions happening. This will be the main room where we will be having most of the events, but there is another room, a conference room 1, where normally the breakout room, one of the breakout rooms will be held, and it's on the 1st floor. So the next floor after here, we are on the 2nd floor now. And then there will be a 3rd room, which will mostly host the incubator hub. So let me acknowledge young people in here that this renewed feeling that we can is happening with you, and we have lots of expectations of young people in this network. So the incubator hub is there on the 1st floor as well, and there are directional signs to guide us in there. So it's a place I would highly recommend that you visit and see the different innovations happening on the continent. Currently, we have, over here now, we have about 200 people joining us in person, but online, we have a bigger number. following through. So please interact with them. Let them feel your presence whilst you're here. And please, you can be participating in the online community as well through social media platforms. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, and then LinkedIn. And I think recently there's another one that has been added. Is it TikTok? Yes. There are multiple platforms. So the young people, please do your work.
Thank you, Kashif. Welcome, everybody. Welcome and welcome. Kashif, the chair of Evidence 2023, and myself, Rona Mijumbi, a co-chair, are very, very pleased to have you with us today. Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to the 6th Biennial Evidence Conference, and it's a great pleasure to host you as part of the local hosts. The Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis are your local hosts, but generally the Africa Evidence Network, the Secretariat, is also very, very pleased to have you again this year. It's good to have you in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. If you have ventured outside the conference room or outside your hotel rooms, I'm sure you agree with me, you're really in the Pearl of Africa. Yeah. So Evidence 2023 is a reminder of everything that is Africa Evidence Network. The brilliance, the growth, the warmth. Everywhere I look in this room, I see brilliance. I see people and groups that have grown, and I also see lots of friendships that have blossomed over the years, lots of warmth. But I also see resilience. Over the years, over the past few years, we've gone through a few rough patches. All of us, individually, as groups, as nations, but also as the network, we've gone through a few rough patches, but we continue to grow from strength to strength, and I want to congratulate each one of us, because last week we hit the 5,000 membership mark, and that is no mean feat. Honourable Minister, the ladies and gentlemen you see here today are people who will not rest until poverty and iniquity have been kicked out of Africa. And they believe that there is no better way of doing this than by using the data, the information, the research, and the evidence that we have at our hands to inform the decisions, the policies and practices on the continent. They therefore work really hard to innovate and to ensure that the processes of linking that information to the final beneficiaries like yourselves and others is actually smoothened. They're here this week to share lessons, to formulate new partnerships, and to make more plans around these important matters. They have arrived at this point more than 10 years since the network began, and at this point I would like to acknowledge our founding director, our founding chair, Ruth Stewart. Let's all really applaud. Okay. So they have arrived here 10 years later by believing in the concept of working hard at this concept, but also working together at it. They have understood and can testify to what our West African friends, the Ghanaians proverb says and means. A single bracelet does not jingle. But also what our East African friends from Tanzania say, that a single stick may smoke, but it will not burn. Indeed, as we interact over the next few days, I want to encourage us to stay connected. Stay connected with the new knowledge and the lessons that are in abundance at the conference, and stay connected with the belief we have in the evidence. Above all, I would like you to stay connected with the new and old faces in this network and family, because this, I'll leave you with another proverb, overload of proverbs today. But like the South African friends, the Zambians say, a person's wealth is not in the bank, but in their relationships. Take that with you. Thank you. And at this point, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome our guest of honor, the Honourable Alello Beatrice Akori. She is the Minister of State in the Office of the President in charge of economic monitoring. She's also the woman member of parliament for Agago district here in Uganda in the 11th Parliament of Uganda, and she serves as a member of the ruling National Resistance Movement Party. She's a distinguished political leader. She's known for her unwavering commitment to community development, to women's rights, and to economic monitoring. Please welcome with me, Honourable Beatrice.
Distinguished delegates who are here, Madam Rona, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to see all of you here. I've been introduced. My name is Beatrice Akori, the Minister in charge of economic monitoring. And my ministry is directly linked to the mission of this conference. I'm very happy to be here today. On behalf of Government of Uganda, and on my own behalf, I warmly welcome all of you to the Pearl of Africa and to the Evidence 2023 conference. You're most welcome. Some of you could have been reading that Uganda is the Pearl of Africa and you didn't get opportunity to come to Uganda. This is a very good platform for you to witness that surely Uganda is a Pearl of Africa. It is an honor for us in Uganda to host this evidence conference. I understand several of these conferences have been taking place in South Africa over the past decade. And to this effect, I would like to thank the organizers for choosing Uganda as your host. I was told you've been confined in South Africa, but we are very lucky as the Pearl of Africa to host this conference outside South Africa. We are really honored. I am particularly happy that as a person who uses evidence to inform cabinet submissions, to see that we gather here in this conference to discuss topical issues on using information, data, and other forms of evidence for decision making. In Uganda, I'm glad I have a team I'm going to work with to inform cabinet and executive on evidence that we have to transform our society economically. I'm so grateful. This conference is held at a time when the world is increasingly threatened by common social, economic, and health crises, such as worsening food insecurity. In Uganda, we have been hit seriously by prolonged drought. The rain has just started raining, I think a week ago. Changing weather patterns, epidemics and pandemics, all leading to widening inequalities and iniquities within communities, which is more true on the Africa continent. This conference provides an opportunity for you delegates to deliberate on what needs to be done differently based on evidence to make Africa safer for us, for our children, and the future generations. So your being here is very, very important to us. As you are aware, we live in times where access to information is defining our existence. Like access to information in Uganda is a right. One may even say we are experiencing information overload. I therefore salute you for driving the idea of pushing for utilization of information and data to inform policy processes for evidence-based decisions. Kofi Annan once said, and I quote, "Knowledge is power. Information is liberating," of which you young people, you have come up to give us information to liberate Africa. As government, we are really, really excited about this. The COVID-19 pandemic, which is still very fresh in our minds, revealed and confirmed our vulnerabilities as Africans and the need to invest in research, data, and information to address our socio-economic challenges, the need for more research and generation of evidence on our indigenous knowledge in addressing some of our health challenges cannot be underrated. At times, we cut and paste. That's why some of the ideas we come up with failed. But now we are looking at how we can magnify our indigenous knowledge. It's amazing. I want to challenge you that at the end of this conference, you would have come up with deliberate, actionable resolutions on utilization of indigenous knowledge. There are missed opportunities when we do not use what is readily available to us locally. Africa, we are very rich, but we tend to look outside Africa more. This is the time we need to think within the box. Furthermore, this evidence conference brings together policymakers, scientists like me. I'm a scientist. I'm a chemist by profession. I did chemical engineering. And civil society organizations to engage and collaborate on best practices for using information in policy processes. We've been discussing with Madame Rona some of the policy that we need to review as a country. And I'm glad that my directorate is signing MOU to work with them. It is important that in the spirit of Pan-Africanism and Batu, we learn together and share and support each other to build a knowledge base for evidence-informed decision-making for Africa as a continent. To appreciate use of evidence in policy processes, the government of Uganda established a framework for oversight, monitoring, and evaluation for the executive, known as APEX platform. In my ministry, one for the first in Africa, domiciled in the office of the President and Department of M&E under the Parliament of Uganda. We are about to release a report government has been implementing very many interventions for commercialization in agriculture for the past 13 years. So through this Apex platform, we have scrutinized all these interventions. We have seen what has worked, what has not worked, and why it has not worked. And we have come up with actionable resolutions or recommendations to inform the executive on what needs to be done next time as we are implementing commercialization of agriculture. Our President, General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, guided us that there are 4 sectors driving Uganda's economy, of which commercialization is one of them. So we are looking at all intervention. We have already looked at them, interventions under commercialization. So this aspect is digging evidence of what has worked, what has not worked, and what needs to be done. Allow me to recognize Professor Nelson Zitsewa Kambo and Dr. Rona Muzimbi, among other researchers here with us, for their unrelenting efforts towards evidence generation and sharing. We really want to thank you so much for the good work you're doing. I commend the Uganda's Center for Rapid Evidence and Relevant Information in timely manner to support informed decision making. I applaud your every effort in trying to make a better world for us all through data, information, and research. I once again welcome you to this conference and the Pearl of Africa. I invite you all to take time off after the conference to enjoy the beauty of this country. We have so many national parks, about 10 of them. You can choose to go to one. We have historical sites. There are so many places you can go to after the conference. Feel free. Thank you so much. I declare the Evidence 2023 conference open for God and my country.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I believe you have given us an additional push, for the next 3 days, but not the 3 days alone, to know that government appreciates what we do and actually makes use of it. I'm really proud to say we're beginning to see some of the fruits. My colleagues sometimes, I don't even think sometimes, I think many times we have sat in rooms wondering whether what we do makes a difference. Do they listen? Do they use the evidence? What are we even doing, But to give an example of Apex, Apex is something that we pushed with the director here for so many years. All through the COVID pandemic, we were trying to look at the evidence of how oversight can be done in the president's office. And 5 years later, we hear of a report coming out of a reform that came through evidence-informed decision-making. So I believe we have an example that can push us for the next 3 days. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I will re-echo the last words of get out there, see a piece of Uganda before you leave Uganda. Thank you so much, Madam Minister. We will have a break now, and we will return 15, 20 minutes. I'm looking for my...
We can continue. Let's just...
Is that what they're saying? Yeah? Okay. Apparently, we enjoyed the session so much that we took up all the time that was supposed to go to our break. So we will go straight into the next session. And I am happy to present to you one of the biggest champions of evidence in Africa. Many of you will already know her. Many of you will have bumped into her work. Many of you, especially in the evaluation field, will really know this name. Adeline Sibanda is a senior resident for Impact at Mastercard Foundation. Adeline has over 30 years of experience in strategy, program design, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. She's passionate about promoting the use of evaluative evidence with a decolonization lens in all policy processes. Adeline has worked in over 25 sub-Saharan African countries. So you understand when I say experience, right? Over 25 sub-Saharan African countries with civil society organizations, community-based organizations, governments, private sector, the UN has been, part of this portfolio, and very many other development partners. She's the past co-chair of Eval Partners, past president of the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation, and the past president of the African Evaluation Association. Adeline has been raising a lot of awareness and advocating for the Made in Africa evaluation. And I'm sure all of you know this one. It's an AFREA initiative promoting evaluation practice rooted in African contexts and priorities, as well as the South-to-South cooperation in evaluation, an initiative of 5 regional evaluation associations from the Global South. Do I need to convince you anymore? No. I'll stop right there and I'll invite Adeline to speak to us. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind words. Is my mic on? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, you can't hear me. I was preferring to use the handheld mic because I could move around. That way have to be switched off. I don't know which one is working now. Both are working. Okay. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Honourable Minister Beatrice Akori, Minister of State in the Office of the President for Economic Monitoring, the co-chairs of AEN, the organizing committee, and distinguished guests. It is such an honor to be here talking to you. In fact, my colleague reminded me how I got to this place, how I came to the Africa Evidence Network event. And it was very interesting because it was by mistake. In 2016, my colleague, Serge Eric, could not make it because he'd been invited to speak. And he said, "Oh, Adeline, since you are in South Africa, you can go ahead and represent me and speak on my behalf." And since then, it's been history. So that's how I came to become a member of Africa Evidence Network. So before I speak, I want to put a disclaimer
Yes, I am with the Mastercard Foundation, but I want to say that all the points that I'm going to present, all the views in my presentation are my own views. And they do not represent the Mastercard Foundation's views. My colleagues, Ayo and Sajilu, will be presenting and talking to what the Mastercard Foundation is doing. So all the questions that you have around Mastercard Foundation, direct them to them. Okay, all right. If I could have my slides up. Thank you. Okay, because I can't see, I'll also have my slide deck here. Okay. So this is the outline of my presentation so that you just know where I'm going. I will not go through each one of them. And I was really intrigued by the theme of this conference. And the theme of this conference is coming together to build a knowledge base for evidence-informed decision-making. When I heard the theme, I started thinking. Many questions came to me. I had so many questions and very few answers. And the questions were, are we really coming together? Who is coming together? Could we be missing some groups of people as we come together? And when you talk about a knowledge base, whose knowledge and by whom? And which types of knowledge do we value? And I guess this question has been answered by the opening ceremony and the minister around which type of knowledge should we value if we are not valuing it? How is the knowledge base gathered? And who gets to use that knowledge base? And lastly, but not least, what power structures govern the evidence ecosystem? I must say that I will not answer all these questions, but I'm hoping that during the course of these next 3 days, you'll get to answer some of these questions and get to discuss some of these questions that I have raised here. I want you to look at this picture and just speak to your neighbor and say, what do you see? Yeah, so tell them what you see. Not ask them the question. Tell them what you see. I'll give you a minute. Okay. I am sure you have your answers. I'm sure you have your answers. Maybe just a few hands. We don't need the mic. What are you seeing? And those who are online, I'm not forgetting you. Please just write in the chat, what do you see? Right? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So there's a crown, there's a bearded man. Who sees something different? Let me ask the side. Yes? You see a woman. Yeah? I'm sure we could go on and on and on, and we all see things differently. Right? I think that's the point I'm trying to make. We also see things differently. And we see things differently based on our past, our history, where we come from, our education, our experiences, and many things influence what we see. So, yeah, so our past is really important. And why is it important? It is important because our past has shaped who we are today and who we are becoming in the future. It also shapes our future. So there are many events in life that have shaped the way we think, our mindsets. What we see today, what we saw in that picture, and even our attitudes, our values, our traditions, and many, many things. Our work that we do is shaped by our past, by our influences. Various institutions have influenced how we think. And we can't ignore the impact that colonialism had on us. What we see, what we value, and what we call our truths, in inverted commas, are also shaped by colonialism, by our colonial past. And, I speak to colleagues and I talk about colonialism. They'll say, listen, that was in the past. That doesn't matter. Let's just talk about the present moment. But we cannot ignore our history. So the power asymmetries and inequalities in all facets of our lives are a direct result of our history. And so we need to interrogate those. They shape how we think, what we see, and what we do. So it is very important to interrogate that. Odora Hooper's one of my favorite writers says that, talking about colonialism, because it's important to know why is it important that we still talk about colonialism today. She says that the first phase of colonialism was the colonization of the lands and physical spaces. And I know I would say in theory, most African countries have been liberated in terms of the physical spaces and the lands. And I'm saying in theory, and I'm sure you know why. The next phase was the colonization of the mind through education and other disciplines, the institutions that we relate with. So they also continue to play a role in coloniality, which we'll talk about more. Our education structure, our judiciary structure, they are all shaped based on whoever colonized that nation on the African continent. There are several effects of colonialism that we can talk about, but I'm just putting a few here. And one of those effects is we look down on African practices or African culture and African values. Anything African, we just look down upon it. We don't see value. We start asking, is it valid? Is it credible? All those words start coming in when you talk about anything African. Yeah? Even the language we use. I know when I was born, those many years ago, it was really the in thing to call your child an English name. So that's why I don't have a Shona name. At one time, I thought of changing my name, but it just was such a process. So our mindsets are shaped by our colonial past. The power asymmetries continue underpinned by what we call coloniality, which is the continuation of colonialism. So colonial power structures define the current systems. So as I said, the financial system, the market systems, and therefore, when we just go in and collect evidence and not interrogate the history within that sector that we are collecting evidence, we are missing a huge chunk of what makes that sector what it is and why it functions the way it functions. So it is important. So our mindsets or our worldviews have been influenced by and shaped by colonialism. So it's important that we really reflect around those effects of colonialism. Another quote, that's not a quote, but we need to challenge the power structures. So there are power relations that exist. And sometimes we go into a situation where we collect evidence and we don't realize that we are overbearing, and therefore whatever is coming out is actually our own views rather than the views of the communities or the people that we serve, that where we are collecting evidence. So just me, as my presence as an evidence producer, whether I'm a researcher or an evaluator, already there are power issues there. And you can already see that there was the one who's wielding power and the one who has no power at all. So the structures that define unequal power relations need to be challenged. So therefore, how do we relate with those people that we serve and the communities we serve? For us, we serve young men and women. How do we relate with them? Are there any power issues that we need to interrogate? We need to challenge the fact that we look at Western ideas and Western institutions as having greater value than our own. We therefore need to go through a process where we go through self-discovery, really discovering, who am I? What biases do I have? And what do I value? Do I value indigenous knowledge systems? Do I value our culture? Do I value the communities that we are working with? So it's very, very important. So I was reading just last week that actually the first education system was established in Africa, and actually was established in Egypt. But we hardly hear of that because of our history, because whatever developments took place then were erased, during colonialism. And it is important to reflect on our past wins and on our past knowledge production, our past ways of knowing, our past traditions. How can we bring them in? So the denigration and destruction of any practice of African culture or anything African has to be challenged. The current knowledge evidence production system needs to be challenged. I know very often we've assumed that the knowledge that we use or that we put out there is valid. I'll give you an example. So usually when I start a presentation, I always start with these risk trends that say this is how it is and we are going this way, and I will not say which report that is. But I was going to start with that as usual. And then I said, what am I presenting on? On evidence. Okay, let me just dig deeper. How was this data derived? Who collected it? And who responded to the data? What I saw is that 38% of the respondents, representing the whole world, 38% were from Europe. Only 12% were from Africa. And about 7%, I think, were from Asia. And I'm like, wow, this is one of the biggest populated continents. And how come? And then I also looked at who collected the data. And who were these people that were giving this information? And then I asked myself, so could I really stand there and say, this data represents the African continent? this data represents the majority of the African people who are mainly, in communal lands or who are not part of the elite. So those are the conversations I had with myself. And guess what? I deleted the slide because it was not valid. The data was not valid. And we could not say it is representative. Let me talk about decoloniality because that's my topic. Decoloniality of evidence. Just so that we know what we are talking about, I'll just read through one of my favorite authors, Ndlovu Gachane. He says, decolonization is the dismantling of physical occupation and direct colonization administration. However, this did not give rise to post-colonial world. African leaders today continue to manage and maintain the global system as they inherited it. They continue to manage it as it was without changing much. They only replaced the colonial rulers. That's why we find that our education system is problematic. Our judiciary systems are problematic, right? So decoloniality speaks to the deepening, widening of decolonization movements in spaces that experience the slave trade, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, neocolonialism, and underdevelopment. So decoloniality is seen as an epistemological and political movement and as a necessary liberatory language. And this time, we are not liberating ourselves from people. We are liberating our own minds because we have really, our minds are colonized and we think in a colonial way. So we need to decolonize the worldviews, our own worldviews, the way we see things, what we value and what we do. So, Ngugi wa Thiong'o says, in Africa, the colonization of the mind still persists through our education systems, how we undervalue African traditions, cultures, and even ways of knowledge production. How do we produce our knowledge? I remember when I started talking about Made in Africa evaluation, I would be asked, is that way of collecting data valid? Is it reliable? I got all the words, that you could talk about. Validity. How do we, is it transferable? Can we generalize it? So all these words started coming because I had spoken about a Made in Africa evaluation. Whenever we talk about anything African, as I said, we undervalue it and we see it as if it will not produce the results we want and it will not be applicable. And yet we are talking to about Africans, to Africans, for Africans. And so, how do we justify that? So, what is the problem then? I think there is a problem. So, this is adapted from Mujiba. She says most evaluations, and I would say research as well, in Africa today, is rooted in dominant Western approaches. And this presents two problems. The first is Western evaluations and research methods and approaches that we use, when used in Africa, may in fact lack the validity that we talk about. It may also lead to low quality products, wrong conclusions, and bad development outcomes or decisions. Western evaluations or research approaches may encourage subjugation of African culture through neo-imperialism and the colonization of the mind. Remember, I talked about how evaluators and researchers have power. When we go into a community and we just ask them, how much do you earn? Can you imagine if I came to you and asked you how much you earn? Will you just tell me that? But we expect them to tell me how much they earn without even winking our eyes. We expect them to say how much they earn. That is very personal. And we don't have a relationship. We just fly in and we just think, because I'm an evaluator, I'm a researcher, I have power. I can ask these questions and I must expect answers. Let's think through. How do we ever think of building relationships with the people where we're collecting data? Never mind feeding back or asking them what is it that they want out of whatever intervention or data collection process. Because they also have aspirations. They also have wants. And they would love to use the evidence that you produce, but most often we don't go back to tell them what we found out. I'm sure I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to other people. You all go back. So when we talk about decoloniality of evidence, as my topic says, decolonizing evidence production, or which is maybe research, evaluation, or synthesis, I'm going to include that there, must deal with the colonial systems that have shaped the global South. We need to deal with those systems. How are we collecting this evidence? What evidence are we valuing? And you'll find that I am reinforcing and repeating some of the things that I've said because I think repetition is good. It is about dealing with our education system, our mindsets, and what we value as evidence. I mean, I hear a lot of results that come or the presentations that are made. I don't seem to see where are these people where you've collected the evidence, who has collected the evidence, and where are the people that you are serving or you want to serve. It is about restructuring and reconstruction of the power relations in the way evidence production has been influenced and constructed. So we must interrogate the design of our research, the design of our evaluation, the conduct of it, and the knowledge production. It is about evidence producers recognizing and employing indigenous knowledge systems. And that was already said during the opening. Instead of looking down on indigenous knowledge systems, we must see how can we learn from them. Yes, I said learn from them, because we can learn a lot from the indigenous knowledge systems. The indigenous ways of being or indigenous realities, how can we learn from them and employ them in the way we do our work? The culture, the language. Am I going to insist that somebody who doesn't speak English must understand? Or, we speak in a language that they don't understand and force them, they can barely just speak English or French, but we still push that they speak the language. Already that is disempowering because they are not on level ground. They will answer one word, two words. Yeah? And in the indigenous ways of doing, such as values and traditions, what traditions are we valuing in our work? And how can we, if we are starting to do it, how can we do more of it? And how can we make those indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous knowledge systems, the dominant way of producing evidence? Because the people we serve are actually shaped by those cultures, by those traditions. They make meaning to them. So it's important that we employ those. So there's need to be consciously aware of the paradigms that underpin the entire knowledge production and evidence synthesis processes. It is important to reflect on the inclusivity of the worldviews. Whatever worldview we use, how inclusive is it? Or is it alienating others that could participate? So the ways of knowing and ways of perceiving reality of Africa are best articulated, as Chilisa would say, using a relational paradigm. As I said, if I just come in and I start asking questions and I'm a stranger within a community, within a space, you're not going to get the answers you want. And I know we've published many, many reports, and we call it the truth. But really, usually I find that there's a black box that does not get opened when you're a stranger asking all these questions. You're not going to get the right answers. They've become experts in responding to you. You want to give us funding, or there's an expectation that you may give us funding, we'll give you the answers you want. It's a transactional relationship because we don't know each other, so we might as well just make it like that. So it is important to just look at how we collect, produce evidence. I'm going to look at this, I call it an evidence ecosystem, but just to demonstrate, it's work in progress, but just to demonstrate what I'm going to be really focusing on. So the focus really is on, we want to look at mainly evidence producers and evidence synthesizers. Very often we've been speaking about, policymakers must use evidence. Those foundations should use evidence. But we hardly self-reflect as evidence producers or evidence synthesizers to say, is the evidence that we are using, we are producing, appropriate, applicable, relevant, and is it collected in a transparent way? So today, the focus is really on evidence producers, and I'll call those who are doing primary research, evaluations, and those who are doing synthesis or systematic reviews as evidence producers. So from now on, I'm going to talk about evidence producers, and it encompasses all of them. So I'm going to go into some of these topics that will be covered during this conference, and just either ask questions or tell you, or just say my point of view. I have a point of view for everything, but I will not answer all my questions. But just to raise questions that you can start talking about as you go on to, into the sessions. So we are going to be talking about valuing evidence differently. So for me, the most important thing here is about shifting our paradigms that we use for evidence production. We also need to reconsider what we value as credible evidence sources. What do we value as credible evidence sources? It's important to look at that. There's also a need to question whether what we consider the so-called golden standard is so gold after all, and does not discriminate against people that we purport to serve. Are there other ways that we could collect evidence that can actually, or produce evidence that can actually be as reliable, as valid, or even more valid than what we call the golden standard? How do we ensure that we do not subjugate African cultures in the evidence production process? I'm sure you will be able to answer those questions in your sessions. Where do we place indigenous knowledge systems? Are we really giving it the prominence it deserves? Could we begin to place the African people and the African culture and the indigenous knowledge systems at the center? It is important. After all, we are working in Africa. And so how do we come up with Western ways or processes, and then we try and apply them without repackaging or adjusting them to be applicable to our continent? I think earlier on the minister spoke about how during the COVID pandemic, we were able to learn from some of the indigenous knowledge around health And it really helped a lot to avert what could have been a catastrophe. When we look at equity and inclusion, which are really pivotal to the work that we do, and I asked those questions earlier on, could we be missing some other groups? The Agenda 2063 emphasizes broad-based, inclusive, participatory, and systems approaches. And I would say that most of us don't talk about the Agenda 2063. That's how much we don't value African-grown agendas or strategies. We all know, we can all talk about the SDGs, Agenda 2030. We can say all the goals without even, stopping. But when we talk about Agenda 2063, have we ever really looked at it and say, what does it mean for me as an evidence producer? What are they trying to do? How could I contribute to achieving those goals that they've set? But I think one of the key important issues here is about inclusive, participatory, and systems approach. And it's not about bringing people together and they come into the room and we call it participation. It's about valuing their contribution, valuing what they bring on board, and I'll talk more about that soon. So systematic barriers in the evidence system need to be addressed. This includes our attitudes, policies, practices, traditions, and the language we use, as I mentioned earlier on, the values that discriminate certain groups from participating. I'm thinking about, we work with young men and women, people that are differently abled, people that are in hard-to-reach areas. How are we making sure we reach those people? I'll tell another story. I like telling stories. So I've got a young person that I mentor, and she was telling me that she's a communication specialist. They were trying to find out why in a certain village they were not pro child immunization. They called it pro because they'd already made up their mind that they don't want to be immunized. And so they said, come, the communication team, come, let's have a story. Let's tell the story. And then she tells me that they went to this place, and it was about a 5-hour journey by car. And then they had to leave the car and then walk. By the time they got there, it was night, and they had to sleep in the village. Remember, all the vaccines have to be kept cold. And so by the time they get there, the communities have gone back to their homes and they are tired. And therefore, there were two things here. The health professionals did not want to walk those long distances for 5 hours. That's number one. Number two, the communities didn't want to wait for a whole day for their children to be vaccinated. So she came back and said, you know what? We were writing the wrong things in our reports. We were saying the communities don't want their children vaccinated, which was a wrong assumption. So sometimes knowing exactly what is on the ground and really digging down and getting to participate and learn what is going on, you get to learn more. So barriers so entrenched that they may be unintended or unforeseen or unseen by those that do experience that experience. So for example, I may be an evidence producer, but I don't see certain barriers that I may have or certain biases that I may have that so I just don't see. The things I do, the things I say are based on the fact that I'm just blinded to my own mindset and my own paradigms. So it is important. So here reflexivity becomes very important. We need to interrogate our own biases, our own privileges. Am I seeing this with biased eyes? And what privileges am I coming from that may be shaping my worldview that I see or that I'm using as I collect this evidence? And so we talked about the importance of the voices of the communities. We talked about, important that young men and women participate and those who are differently abled. And so how do we ensure that we do not leave any group behind? It is important. We are also going to talk about localization. So the question I'm asking you is localization being used as a metaphor or a buzzword that is aimed at window dressing? What do we really mean when we talk about localization? So it is about shifting power and resources and ownership to local people, putting them at the center. Are we doing that? Or when we talk about localization, what are we talking about? I hope you'll be able to talk more about that. What is preventing the localization agenda within the evidence system? I would put it to you is the persisting power imbalances between the global north and the global south. Well, I'm sure you'll find out when you go into your sessions. You'll find out more. Why? What is preventing localization? What needs to be done to actualize this? As I said, our mindsets play a huge role in what we say, what we think, our values, our attitudes. I think we need to shift our mindsets. Another area which is important for you to talk about as you go out in your sessions is issues around power, voice, and agency. As I said earlier, knowledge production is a power issue. And power to influence theory and practice is very important. It's important to give agency and voice through addressing power asymmetries and inequalities to ensure credible, relevant research or evaluations that the process as well as the results. Knowledge production should include communities or the people we serve, and that is very important. And how are we doing that? We need to find solutions that do not alienate indigenous people and cultural practices, but complement them. So we need to be really, I'm hoping that by the end of these next 3 days, we are coming up with solutions. And maybe this is the last time we'll be pointing out on the problems. Let's come up with solutions. How do we address these power asymmetries? How do we give voice? How do we give agency? So we need to incorporate indigenous knowledge systems as values, culture, and we need to allow those we serve to set their own agendas. So evidence production process, including frameworks, should be restructured to avoid disempowering the indigenous people and once again strip them of their agency and dignity. So we need to really reflect around that. I never finish a discussion without Ubuntu. I really love the Ubuntu philosophy, which is really, it's a relational sort of philosophy. It's about I am what I am because of who we are. If we are relational and if we come together and if we are empathetic with the people that we are serving, we are caring, we are reciprocal, we cooperate, compassion, empathy, it is very easy to then involve them in what we do. Remember, relations matter within the African communities. It cannot be transactional, it has to be relational. Whatever we do, whatever work we do, must be relational. So how do we create those relationships? So that we don't leave them behind, so that we deal with the unequal power relations, so that there is equity. How do we deal with those? And I'm almost coming to the end. One of my other favorite writers is Professor Begele Chilisa. She's written a lot around research, around evaluation. And she speaks about an African relational paradigm. And could it be possible that as we do our evidence production, we use the African relational paradigm? Chilisa and others say they propose an African relational paradigm rooted in African worldviews. It is also a paradigm that incorporates the Ubuntu philosophies that I spoke about earlier. It is rooted in African philosophical assumptions of relational ontology, axiology, epistemology, and methodology. So the paradigm that is used is really looking at the African ways of knowing and at the African realities, at the African values, and that is important. It articulates the practices of the spirit of collectivism. And I could speak on and on about this, communalism and cooperation, but I see that my time is almost up. It also recognizes that indigenous people's interests, knowledge experiences, religions, cultural traditions, norms, language, metaphors, and indigenous knowledge systems, community stories. I was so blessed with the opening today, which really brought that. When they started, it was a story that they were telling. I don't know whether you missed it, but it was a story. There are different ways of telling stories. So folklores, legends. When I grew up, my last story. When I grew up, my grandmother used to call us every night around the fire, where she would tell stories about the past, about where we came from and who we are. And these stories were passed from one generation to another. And they shaped who we were and who we are and who we are going to become. It was a way of passing on knowledge from one generation to another. And we valued that knowledge. I was telling my family the other day that my grandmother used to speak in many, she would tell a story, and then you were supposed to know what you're supposed to. She would reprimand you by telling a story. She would tell you how to do a chore by telling you a story. So the learning was so ingrained in you that you didn't forget how to do it when you remembered the story. So that's how knowledge was passed on from one generation to another. And that is very valuable. And I would urge you to explore some of these ways of collecting information. I know very often we bring in storytelling, but we are telling them about the evidence we collected. Or how could we make it such that we let them give us that evidence that they see as valuable, or information that we then turn into evidence that they see as valuable, and therefore build our knowledge base. I was reading through some of the evidence stories, and I think there are 3 that struck me on the AEN website, which were quite good evidence stories, because they were trying to address indigenous knowledge systems, they were trying to address storytelling, and it's really a good way to start. So now, as I come to an end, I want to challenge you. How are you going to change your practice as an evidence producer? Whether you are collecting primary evidence, whether it's evaluations or research. And as a synthesizer, what evidence do you value? are we missing any evidence that could actually revolutionize our practice? We need to reflect around that. So the future of the decoloniality of evidence, to truly speak of decoloniality of evidence, we should ensure that transparency, that means unbiased, accountability, inclusivity, practicality, and applicability of the knowledge production system or the whole process. So I leave that with you, and hopefully I've given you some points to ponder in the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Adeline. Such a difficult topic, right? And such difficult questions she's left us with, but challenged us. But by the end of the 3 days, we should have a few answers or ways forward. But I believe we also have a question or two for her. Might there be one? 2 people might be lucky within the few minutes that we have left. And this also includes our friends online. I'm not forgetting you. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat. Charity is somewhere, she'll pick it up. But I think we do have 1 or 2 questions in the room in the meantime. It could also be a comment. It could also be to affirm something she has said. It could be to question something. Let's see what we've got for Adeline. Yes, please. Mike somewhere. Trying to see where the other hand will be when we have this question.
Thank you very much, Adeline, for that insightful conversation and intriguing discussion this morning. I have a reflection and a question at the same time. Whereas indigenous knowledge is very important in the process of generating evidence-informed decision-making, how do we balance between using, especially community knowledge, without being extractive?
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question from my friend James on that side. We'll take those 2 first.
Thank you so much. What a talk.
I know.
Just so much in such a short time. Question. With all this ChatGPT and the rest, at home, back in Kenya, we call it infodemics. So much information overload. What's your comment about the future, the role of technology in decolonizing evidence?
Okay, is there something burning online? Nothing yet. All right. Adeline, some difficult questions again. And that sounds a lot like James, you know?
I'm laughing because I may not be the right person to ask that question, because if I become very, very blunt around it, you know, it's an opportunity and yet also a challenge. And I'm sure you all know about the opportunities. It means that we'll be able to produce data faster. We will be able to share the data faster. And it means we can, you know, bring more data sources together. But my challenge is, how was that data produced? Who contributed to that data production? And maybe something less negative, how can we make sure that the right data that is representative of our communities and the people we serve also makes it to ChatGPT? Because I believe the current data represents a certain group of people that is on the internet or within the ChatGPT. And also, we can also ask about the accuracy. So I have also attempted to use ChatGPT. And I've also seen that there are certain things that may not be accurate. And so we also need to be aware of our sources that we use. So I'll leave it at there, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to discuss it in your sessions. But it's very, very important. We don't want to be left behind, but we should also just be very, very aware of some of the challenges. In terms of reflection around not being extractive, I think it's very important to ensure that we don't just go and take out information. Number one, I think it's important to know that the communities are not frozen in time, and we are the ones that are coming to save them. So we are not their saviors. So that is very important. So we need to also know what is it that they want out of the information that we are collecting, out of the data that we are collecting. How would they want to use it? And how would they want it presented? How do they want it presented? So that's one. And I think it's important to also look at how they would propose that you collect the data, and how do you report back? Because they will also want to use it. And very often we assume that they don't need the data. They don't need the information we're collecting. And how could we make communities own the data? I was speaking to some colleague in Fiji, and she said we came up with an indigenous framework on evaluation. And I said, can I see it? Is it possible that you can share? You know what she said to me? She said, I need to seek for permission from the community holders that are holding the database. When they agree, I'll share with you. And I respected that. So we need to see how can we make the communities in charge of their own data. And I actually must also acknowledge my colleague Connor this morning. We were speaking about that this morning, about making sure that we are not extractive in the way we deal with data. So yeah, maybe my response is shaped by that discussion as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Adeline. Those were the lucky two, but Adeline she has a session later this afternoon. So if you still have something burning, you could slip it into that session. So make sure you
Tomorrow.
go to, is it tomorrow? Tomorrow. So make sure you find where she is if you still have something burning, but you could also find her at dinner and make her dinner a bit, So thank you so much. We'll take a break. And I think our guest of honor will be leaving for other duties, but we do thank her very much for joining us. And I am sure she's gone away also with a bit of, of us. She knows what we do. She has taken more information about who we are, and she will continue to engage with us. We thank you for making the time to be with us. So let's take a break. We'll be back in 10 minutes to complete this, and then we'll take a longer break after that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Adeline.